She's tied to a dead stall and whispers, "I'm just bait." An old rancher frees her and sets a winter town against a velvet-collared banker. Ink lies, law thins, lanterns climb the hill. When the wind dies, who speaks? Saddle up, this one keeps its heat for morning. The wind had teeth up on Hardscrabble Ridge. It sawed through the loose boards of a fallen lean-to and lifted powdery snow into the stall like sifted flour. A lantern hung crooked from a bent nail, glass clouded with smoke, flame the size of a thumbnail. Ropes ran from a frost-white post to a pair of wrists gone purple at the edges. Amos Whitlow pushed in out of the gust, hat-brim crusted, scarf stiff with rime. His right shoulder creaked the way it did before a storm. The place smelled of damp straw, sheep tallow, and horse that hadn't stood there in months. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. He let the door fall to, quieting the wind enough to hear a slow, stubborn breath. She was there against the post, dress torn at the sleeve, hair stuck to one cheek with thawed and refrozen sweat. Her eyes were open, not wild, just tired and watchful, like a range calf that's seen more winter than it should. The rope had frozen to her skin. Each twist of hemp had left a red seam. "Easy," Amos said, voice low so it wouldn't spook her or the silence. He slid a Barlow from his pocket and laid the blade under the rope, working the edge until the fibers gave with a dry, icy pop. The second loop came free, slower. His shoulder bit when he reached up. He grunted once and didn't repeat it. Her hands fell to her lap and stayed there. She brought them in close, palms to mouth, working breath into the fingers. The breath came out in steam. The lantern bobbed and sent a small light over raw skin. "You hurt any place worse than I can see?" he asked. She shook her head and then nodded, both at once, as if arguing with herself. When she spoke, it was a thread of sound, nothing to spare. "I'm just baked." The words hung in the cold like chips of iron. Amos kept the knife in his hand, but he quit moving for a beat. The wind rasped along the cracks. Somewhere outside, the horse pawed at ice, impatient for a man to do or quit. "Bait for what?" he said. She swallowed. "Water." It came out like a cough. "My daddy's valley. They can't take it clean, so they'll take it crooked. They set me here till he signs." Amos looked around the stall, the broken manger, the split boards, the lantern trying its best. "They figure wrong," he said. He unwound his wool scarf, frayed where sheep had nibbled at the fringe years back, and settled it over her shoulders. The heat of it was small, but it was a heat she hadn't had. Her jaw stopped shaking. He checked her ankles, rope burns there too, less bad, and cut them free. She tried to stand and didn't quite make it. He caught her under the arms, and her weight slid his shoulder out of line another inch. He winced and set her down gentle. "You walk some?" he said. "I'll carry the rest." She studied his face, like weighing if he meant it. Up close he smelled like coal smoke and wet leather. She nodded once. "Name's Lydia Hart." "Amos Whitlow," he said. Twin Cottonwoods Place. A gust shoved the door and blew the lantern nearly out. He cupped it with his palm until the flame found itself again. He straightened the hook with a thumb so the lantern hung true. Little things, but they held. He wrapped her forearms with a strip from an old feed sack he found under the manger, tying soft so the cloth wouldn't freeze to blood. She bit down on her lip and didn't make noise. When he was done, she looked smaller, not weaker, just gathered in. "Can you sit a saddle?" he asked. "I can sit," she said. "Don't promise prettily." "That'll do." He eased her to the doorway. The hinges complained, and the wind came back mean and full of knives. The horse blew steam and stamped. Snow squeaked under boots. Amos felt the shoulder talk hard. He let it talk and didn't answer. He lifted her up, slow, careful of the raw places. She set herself in the blankets, jaw set, eyes on the white beyond the corral. "You ain't bait now," he said, tightening the cinch, checking the lead rope, everything he'd done 1,000 mornings. "Your company." Her mouth twitched like it might become a smile someday when the air wasn't this cold. "We'll see," she said. Amos took the lantern off its nail and hooked it to his saddle horn. The flame was small, but it walked with them. He led the horse out into the wind. The ridge fell away to a white valley and a line of cottonwoods black against the sky. Behind them the lean-to creaked and settled, and the rope he'd cut lay stiff as wire in the snow. They took the north side of the ridge where the wind had scoured the snow thin. The lantern on Amos's horn threw a small moving hole in the gray. It wasn't much, but it kept the dark from swallowing the horse's ears. The animal blew steam and set its feet, careful iron shoes squeaking on crust. Below them the valley lay white and still. Sage poked through in ragged islands. Cottonwoods along the creek showed black ribs, bark gnawed before when feed ran tight. The creek itself was a long scar of ice with a skin of fresh powder. Every few steps the ice spoke, a dry tick, a hollow thunk down in the dark. "Hold that horn," Amos said. He put the reins in Lydia's good hand and went afoot, leading by the headstall. His right shoulder grumbled with each pull. He let it. The first drift looked harmless and wasn't. The horse sank to the knees, snorted, and came up. Amos felt the tug in his shoulder like a nail driven sideways. He put his palm on the mare's cheek and steadied her. Lydia leaned forward, weight light, knees easy. She knew enough not to fight the saddle. They cut behind a spill of rock to get out of the teeth of it. The wind dropped 2 notches. Amos scraped a dry patch with his boot heel and set Lydia down there while he checked the cinch. His glove had wet through, somewhere in the business at the lean-to. 2 fingers had gone stone. He flexed them and got little for it. Lydia dug under the blankets and came up with a strip of jerky wrapped in copper and a tin flask dented on one side. "Trade you," she said, voice thin but steady. He took the jerky first, salt and smoke and the faint taste of sheep tallow, and chewed until he felt it wake something in his jaw. He handed it back so she could take a bite. Then he tipped the flask. Whiskey went down like a coal, dropped in the gut. He coughed once, short, and passed it over. She sipped and held it a second under her chin to warm the metal before tucking it away. "They want water," she said, not looking at him, eyes down the draw. "Our head gate on Hart Creek. Daddy wouldn't sign. Bragg sent men to teach him how to hold a pen." "Figures," Amos said. The word came out flat. He watched the creek a long beat, listened to the ice talk. "Men who don't want to pay for winter think winter owes them." She glanced at his scarf where it crossed her collarbone. "You'll freeze without that." "I've been cold before," he said. "We'll get you warm, then I'll borrow it back." She nodded once, as if a bargain had been struck and written somewhere they both could read. He took the lantern from the horn and set it in her hands. "Shield it," he said. "Let the wind chew on you, not the flame." She cupped the glass with her fingers. Careful, the rope burns like crooked red strings. When the gusts came, she turned her body without being told, a small wall against that long black mouth of wind. The flame steadied. They moved again. The mare felt the creek crossing before any of them saw it. Ears pricking, head low, Amos tested the edge with the heel of his boot. The ice flexed and sang. He led them 2 steps upstream to a narrow place where willows made a mat. Then went was quick and straight. The ice groaned but held. Halfway over, the lantern sputtered. Lydia bent to it and breathed on the glass, not a full breath, just enough to wipe the frost so the light could find a path. It did. On the far bank, he let himself breathe. The wind came back with its old meanness, pushing at their backs like a bully late to the game. The horse settled into a steady pull. Amos's gloves stiffened to a crust and then to a board. His 2 dead fingers throbbed a little now, coming back slow with pins. The slope eased. Black branches lifted out of the whiteness. 2 cottonwoods side by side. Heavy limbs turned to clubs under rime. Amos's place. A plank fence ran crooked, snow to the second rail. The gate had drifted shut. He shouldered it open, cussing under his breath when the bad shoulder lit. Lydia didn't say a word about it. She held the lantern higher so he could see the latch. Smoke showed from the cabin chimney, thin and honest. He must have banked the coals right that morning. The place hadn't gone dead. He led the mare under the lean-to by the shed and tied her to a ring set in a post. The animal nosed at his sleeve and whickered, the sound small and friendly. "Inside," he said. Lydia slid down slow, boots finding the packed path. Her legs wobbled once and then set. She handed him the lantern back like she was giving a thing to its proper owner. "Thank you for the ride," she said, plain as that. "Ain't over yet," he said. He stamped snow off his boots at the stoop, knocked it from her skirts with the back of his glove. The door stuck the way it always did in a cold snap. He put his shoulder to it and felt the joint complain all the way to his neck. The latch gave. Warmth came out, a mixed smell of coal smoke, coffee left on a back stone, leather drying on a peg. He touched 2 fingers to the brim of his hat toward the room, as if the room were a person. "Home," he told her, not making it more than it was. "Doc'll look at those wrists. We'll set some coffee in you. Then we'll see about Bragg." She stood on the threshold, lantern light on her cheek, scarf pulling close at her throat. The cold had made a choir out of her teeth. Now they quieted. She looked at the low roof, the stovepipe, the table marked up by a lifetime of plates and knives. "It'll do," she said. "It'll have to," he answered, and swung the door wide. The stove woke up slow, ticking as it took its breath. Amos knocked the ashpan with the heel of his hand and fed in what dry he had left. A split of cottonwood and a splintered crate board, then 2 damp sticks from the pile by the door. The wet wood hissed like a snake and laid a dirty smoke along the rafters. He cracked the door and let the worst of it crawl out into the white. "Sit there," he told Lydia, pointing her to a chair with one short leg that wobbled and always had. He swung the coffee pot over to the hot side and set a kettle to steam. The room took on the smells he trusted. Coal smoke, old leather, wet wool thawing out. Her scarf threw a little heat back up under her chin. She closed her eyes against it, the way a cat will. He warmed a rag in the kettle water and dabbed at the rope burns until the ice let go of the skin. The raw lines looked like someone had mapped a crooked river on her wrists. When he lifted her forearm, a sour whiff rose he couldn't place, like ink left too long in the sun. "Doc'll see to you proper," he said. "He ain't far when winter sits heavy." As if the cold had been listening, a boot knocked snow from itself on the stoop. The door came open half a hand, and a beard pushed in, white with rime. "You keepin' a hospital now, Whitlow?" Red Holloway said, voice a notch above a growl. He was fur-capped and bright-eyed, the way trappers get from staring at white too long. Behind him, shouldered in Doc Elkins, hat brim dripping, doctor's bag, clutched like a man carrying the last loaf. "Saw smoke," Red said, "and tracks say you weren't might alone." "Come in 'fore the wind robs you," Amos said. Doc shuffled to Lydia without much talk, set his bag on the table, wiped his glasses on his sleeve, and poured clear liquor into a shallow saucer. "This'll bite," he warned, and his hands, old but careful, went to work. The liquor flashed cold first, then hot. Lydia didn't pull. She fixed her stare on a knot in the wall plank and breathed through the hurt. "That smell," Doc said after a minute, nose wrinkling. He lifted her wrist, sniffed again, then ran a thumb along the edge of her belt where the cloth turned darker. His thumb came away blue. "Aniline ink, let your ink bank stink. You been pressed up against somebody's books, miss." Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. "They dragged me past a desk," Lydia said, voice level. "Clerk had a pen chain, one of those brass ones, and the ledger was wet where he'd slobbered. They laughed. Said my daddy would sign neat once he couldn't hear me no more." Red swore soft and creative into his beard. He edged to the window, lifted the flour sack curtain with a finger, and studied the yard. 4, maybe 5 sets came nosing around here yester evening, he said. Boots with heel irons, 1 mule shod off kilter. They circled like coyotes testing a fence. Bragg's men, Amos said. It wasn't a question. Doc wrapped Lydia's wrists with strips of old sheet, cleaned and boiled, then bound the wraps with a run of soft cloth he kept for sprains. He dabbed something brown that smelled like pine and wintergreen into the worst of the burns. "Keep 'em warm, but not too warm," he said. "You blister, I'll lance. You freeze 'em, I'll fuss." Lydia gave him a look that might have been thanks if there had been any spare. "I can stand it," she said. "I know," Doc answered. He took the coffee Amos poured and warmed his hands on the cup before tasting. "Thin," he said, "but it's honest." The damp sticks in the stove sent up another curl of smoke. It hit the ceiling and wandered back down to eye level. Amos opened the stove door a crack and shoved the crate board deeper, coaxing a better burn. The room brightened a shade. The bright didn't reach his shoulder. It had gone from dull ache to a steady drumbeat. Red tapped the window frame. "Tracks lay fresh on the north side," he said. "They'll come back with a man to speak, so's you don't misunderstand." "Let 'em talk," Amos said. He lifted the coffee pot to top Lydia's tin cup. "We'll listen polite." Doc nodded toward the slinged scarf on Amos's shoulder. "You tore that old trouble again," he said. "I can bind it, or you can be stubborn. Either works till it doesn't." Amos eased onto the chair opposite Lydia and held still long enough to admit it. "Bind it," he said, "but don't waste your good cloth." Doc used the scarf itself, folding it thick and clever until the bad joint found a place to rest. He tied it off with a square knot that would hold in a gale. "That'll buy you a day or two if you don't try to throw a bull," he said. "Plans to avoid bulls," Amos said. Lydia cupped her coffee and watched steam break against the rim. The blue stain on her belt had spread a little where Doc's liquor touched it. She touched it with one fingertip as if making sure it was real. "He's using the bank," she said. "He's not afraid of laws 'cause he keeps one in his pocket." "Silas Bragg keeps more than one thing in his pocket," Red said. "Men, too." "Laws got bones even in winter," Doc said, though he didn't sound like he meant the whole of it. He closed his bag. "You'll need more dry wood. Smoke like this'll set a cough in you." "Dry's gone," Amos said. "We'll make do." "Well," Red said, letting the curtain fall, "makin' do only works till it don't." The wind fluted down the stovepipe and made a hollow note. In the pause that followed, all 4 of them heard it, the long, measured crunch of boot soles on crust, not hurrying, not sneaking, just coming because they'd decided to. The smoke in the cabin seemed to stop and listen. Red's eyes flicked to Amos. Doc reached without looking and slid his bag under the table. Lydia set her cup down and flexed the bandaged fingers once, learning the shape of them again. Amos stood careful, the scarf holding the bad shoulder quiet, and reached for the Winchester that lived on the pegs by the door. "We'll see who's talking," he said, and the stove ticked once more as if to agree. The steps stopped on the stoop like a man measuring his words. Then the latch eased down, and the door came open the width of a hat brim. Cold shouldered in ahead of a man with ice on him on his mustache and a coat the color of wet gunmetal. "Tully Voss," Red said from the window, voice flat. Tully grinned without teeth. He kept one glove on the door, polite as a church usher. Snow salted his shoulders. Behind him, on the porch, a darker shape stood turned sideways to the wind. A badge winked once in the gray and went dull again. Sheriff Mort Kincaid, looking at nothing in particular. "Come for the girl," Tully said. His tone made it sound like he was there to collect a parcel gone astray. "Boss says she wondered." Amos didn't raise the Winchester. He didn't set it down either. The scarf sling held his bad shoulder quiet. He felt the room and where everything lived in it. The peg by the door, the kettle, the table's bad corner, the nail that caught the sleeves if you weren't mindful. He moved a half step so Lydia sat in his line and the stove was at his side. "You wandered wrong," he said. Tully's eyes went to Lydia and back. They were pale eyes that didn't keep a thought long. "She's bait, Whitlow. Bait belongs on a hook, not by a stove." Lydia didn't answer him. Her wrapped hands set quiet on her knees. The blue smear of ledger ink along her belt had bled into a wider bruise of color under Doc's wash. Kincaid cleared his throat once, a hollow sound, like a man pretending to be inside. He didn't cross the threshold. "Door," Amos said. Tully's grin shifted. He let go of the latch as if to swing it wide and invite himself to the heat. Amos stepped into him instead. The Winchester's butt kissed the jamb, held there by his forearm. With the other hand he palmed Tully's coat front and shoved. Wood thumped. Snow shook down off the lintel. The move lit Amos's shoulder like a struck match. The scarf held. Tully came back quick, more cat than ox. "Us," he led with a hand that had brass under the glove. Amos turned his hip, took the glove on the meat of his arm, and let the swing carry Tully past. Red slid a boot behind Tully's heel, the way old men learn to win. Tully went over the chair with the short leg. It clacked twice and gave up. A leather poke leaped from inside his coat, hit the table, and burst its mouth. Paper fanned, script with a red oval stamp, and Sweetwater Bank marching across the top like soldiers. Kincaid saw it. His breath showed once, quick. He looked at the papers the way a man looks at a snake on his own step. Then he put his eyes on the weather and kept them there. Amos set a boot on Tully's wrist and took the glove off him. No brass now, just a cut across the knuckle he hadn't earned here. He kicked the fallen chair aside and hauled Tully up by the back of his coat to stick him against the wall. The Winchester stood by itself a second, leaning in the corner like a quiet uncle. "Tell Bragg," Amos said, voice low, steady. "He's barking up the wrong cottonwoods." Tully tried to smile and found it didn't fit. "You'll freeze out here alone," he said. "Men like you do." Red found a coil of harness strap behind the door and tossed it. Amos caught it left-handed and went to work. He bound Tully's wrists clean and high, crossed the strap at the small of his back so the pull would hold. The knots were square and patient. Tully tested them and learned something. Doc bent and lifted one piece of paper with two careful fingers. He turned it so the light could read it. "Issue note," he said. "Bank script. Bragg's signature, stamped and pretty." Lydia leaned forward. The blue along her belt found a partner in the red of that oval seal. "He leaves ink wherever he walks," she said. Kincaid scuffed his boot once. "Now, Whitlow," he said from the porch, "you don't want trouble with the bank." Amos looked past Tully at the sheriff and did not show teeth or temper. "I want water to run where the creek cut it," he said. "I want a girl taken from a post to sit by a stove. If the bank's got trouble with that, you'll have to pick a side." Kincaid's jaw worked. He could have come in. He didn't. He put his hands behind him like a man doing figures no one else can see. "Law's the law," he said, and made it sound thin as old cloth. He turned his collar up and let the snow take him a step at a time. Red shut the door with 2 fingers and dropped the bar. The room breathed again. Amos picked up the Winchester and set it back on its pegs. He rolled his arm once to see what the shoulder would allow. Not much. Tully watched all of it with a hunter's patience turned backward. "You ain't ready," he said. "You got wood that smokes and a stove that leaks, and you got one good arm. Dawn's long up here. We'll come when the light makes you slow." "Bring less talking," Red said. "You spend words like a drunk spends pay." Amos drew a chair upright and sat like a man who intended to stay. He poured a coffee and set it in front of Lydia first. Her bandaged hands curled around the tin, soaking heat they could keep. She looked at the papers on the table, then at Tully, then at the door where the sheriff had not stood. "I told you," she said, quiet as before. "I'm just bait." Amos shook his head once. "Not here, you ain't." Outside, the wind went thin for a spell and left the world so still the stove ticked like a clock in a church. Then far off, the snow gave a sound like cloth torn slow, the kind of sound a cold dawn makes when it pulls itself over the hills. Dawn came white as bone, the kind that makes sound carry. Frost had stitched lace along the window sash. The stove had settled to a red eye. Amos stood on the porch with the Winchester under his good hand. The sling held his bad shoulder quiet. Red Holloway eased the door wider with his boot and watched over the barrel of a cut-down scattergun he swore he'd found in a fence post. Hoofbeats came first, then the hiss of a torch shouldering through wind. 3 riders pushed out of the gray. One had a coal oil can swinging off his saddle like a church bucket. Another palmed a torch high, flame chewing at the edges in fits. The third wore a scarf across his face, and the kind of hat men use when they don't plan to be remembered. Inside, Tully Voss laughed once, the dry kind a man makes to hear himself. The harness strap creaked when he tested it. Lydia sat forward, bandaged hands on her knees, eyes set. Doc stepped to the hearth and lifted the kettle off so it wouldn't boil over when the door blew. "Don't shoot first," Doc said, which wasn't a rule so much as a wish. The lead rider cupped his mouth. "Whitlow!" The wind tore his name into rags. "Send the girl out, or we warm that shack." "Warm it yourself," Red muttered. A torch sailed. It hit the hay by the shed and stuck there, spitting. Amos snapped the Winchester to his shoulder and took the shot that mattered, the steel band on the torch head. The flame jumped and died in the snow, smoking like a bad thought. The man swore and reached for another. The one with the coal oil trotted for the eaves, sloshing his can, looking to find a seam under the shingles. "Bucket," Lydia said, already on her feet. She pushed past Doc and Tully and grabbed what she could find. A burlap sack fat with sheep tallow, grease stiff in the cold. She shouldered the door into the wind. The gust hit her like a plank. She leaned into it and went anyway, small and hard, the scarf tight at her throat. A second torch came in a slow arc at the stack by the shed. Lydia met it half a step late and slammed the sack down over hay already licking orange. The fat took the heat, softened, and smothered the light with a stink you could chew. Grease bled through the burlap in pale moons. Smoke went low and ugly. "Behind you," Red barked. The torchman had his pistol out, bad angle but close enough. Amos swung, saw only hand, gun, breath. He shot once and barked a splinter off the porch post on purpose. The man flinched. His shot came wild and hissed into the drift. The third rider spurred for the door, thinking to shove through on muscle. A skinny shape slid out of the gray behind him like a fox from a culvert. Toby Pike, hat down to his eyebrows, knife in his teeth, came up under the man's stirrup leather and took one quick slice. Toby slapped the horse hard on the hip. The mount crowhop popped its head and blew the rider straight into a pile of rails. The pistol went one way, the man went the other and stayed there. Wind knocked all out of him. "Toby!" Red hollered, halfway scold, halfway pride. "Howdy," Toby said, breath coming in white ropes. He scooped the dropped pistol and kicked snow over embers by Lydia's boots. "Heard hollerin'. Figured you'd be needin' a hand." The oilman got the can up under the eave and tipped. Amos saw the glug, the dark ribbon wetting wood that hadn't seen that kind of shine. He put a round into the can and punched a hole low. Coal oil blew out sideways, splattered the man's pants and the snow beyond. He jerked back, cussing, and nearly got his own coat alight when the torch kissed his leg. He slapped at himself and fell into a drift, all elbows. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. A crack snapped past Amos's ear. Heat walked his upper arm a half-inch deep and hot as stove wire. He looked down and saw the cloth open, then the seep. Blood went near black where it hit the cold. He didn't waste eyes on it. He worked the lever, felt the smooth habit live there, and put a second shot into the ground by the scarfed man's stirrup. The horse thought better of the porch and spun, dragging its rider 2 steps before he got the foot loose. Inside the cabin, the porch lantern swung on its hook and coughed twice. Wind shouldered through the door Lydia had left open. The flame shrank to a pin and died. Smoke curled up and stopped, nothing to pull it now. The room dimmed to stove glow and winter. "Lantern!" Doc shouted, useless but true. "Hold the girl!" Tully yelled from the wall, voice gone hard and wanting. Lydia wasn't listening to anyone in the cabin. She had both hands on the tallow sack, knuckles red under the wrap, weight set. The last of the flame under it went out with a wet sigh. She kicked the torch head clear and used her heel to grind the spark line into slush. The rider Toby dumped, rolled to his knees, and reached for the pistol he no longer owned. Toby stepped in and put his boot on the man's wrist, same as Amos had done with Tully. "Be smart," he said. His voice still had boy in it, but the boot didn't. The scarfed rider took his chance as the wind dropped. He finally found a clean picture of Amos on the porch and lifted his gun. Red's old scattergun answered from the shadows of the door with a cough that rolled flat across the drifts. The shot took the man's hat and whatever pride was keeping him upright. He slid out of the saddle, landed soft, and lay there counting mistakes. Silence found them in a hurry. It came with the snow. The oil man crawled backward on hands and heels, and then got up and ran crooked into the gray, leaving a slick trail that made him easy to track if anybody wanted to. Nobody did. The scarfed one moaned once and kept his face down in the drift. The third sat against the rails with Toby's boot on him, breath trying to find its way back. Amos let the Winchester down and felt his arm talk hot. He pinched the torn cloth together and watched the blood slow on its own, cold, doing him that one favor. He looked at Lydia. She had grease on her wrists, on the ends of her bandage, on her cheek where she'd brushed hair, away with the back of a hand. The burlap sagged over dead coals, smoking foul but harmless. He nodded at her. "Not bait," he said. "Partner." Her mouth worked once like she might answer more than a word. She settled on, "Hand me that bucket." He did. She poured melted snow over the last sullen red and stood there breathing, steam lifting off the wet burlap in little ghosts. Red shouldered past, scattering shells from his pocket onto the step to count. "2 down," he said. "1 run. That's a favor he'll bring back wrong." Toby looked up, face raw with cold and proud of itself. "Got your mule line cut too," he said. "Figured they didn't need it." Amos pushed the door with his heel. The lantern by the jamb hung dark and dented. He touched the glass with his knuckle and felt the cold come off it like a warning. "We'll light you again," he told it for no reason except the way men talk to stubborn things. Doc had a strip of clean cloth ready. "Inside, he told Amos. No argument in it. "You're leaking on my floorboards." They hauled the 2 who'd stayed into the shed and trussed them with harness and good knots. Tully watched all of it without a word, eyes moving like a trapped cat's. The porch took on the smell of burned oil and old tallow and blood blackening where it met the air. Smoke from the stove went up steady in a thin line. "Dawn's long," Tully said finally, voice gone small in the cold. "Bragg's is longer." Amos looked at the white east and the line of cottonwoods cut black against it. "We'll see," he said. The wind found its voice again and pushed along the eaves. The lantern swung once and still. The day had come all the way, and with it the next thing. They ate what heat the stove would give and then killed it down to coals. Day had thinned to a gray that made edges dull. Red shoveled snow into a washtub and set it by the door for the horse. Doc knotted Amos's bandage tighter until the bleeding quit making a point. Toby stood by the window, cap in his hands. May sent me, he said. Said if there was ruckus, she'd set the word. Bring the man and the papers to town. Says law's thin in winter, bring enough folks to thicken it. Amos looked at the table. The script lay there with its pretty red oval, like a smile he didn't trust. All right, he said. We take Tully. We take what ink we've got. Roads glare ice, Red said. Grade by the beaver cut is slick as a sermon. We'll need a sled. We got one, Amos answered. Ain't pretty. He hooked a thumb toward the shed. They trussed Tully Voss hip and heel, wrapped him in a horse blanket to keep him from freezing before he could hear his own judgment. He didn't fight it. He watched the knots with a studious eye, learning the hands that tied them. One of the wounded riders groaned when Red rolled him. Doc looked and said he'd keep. They left him a pail of water and a blanket, like a man they might still need words from. Amos relit the dented lantern off the stove and set the wick low. Glass showed a star where it had kissed the door jamb in the morning. Lydia took it without being asked. I'll keep it, she said. You keep your fingers, Doc told her. Light's no good if you lose the hands that hold it. They rigged the sled with hay bales for weight and a rope cradle for Tully. Amos led the mare into the traces. She stood easy, breath fogging, ears telling him what the wind said long before his own skin caught up. Toby kicked snow from the runners, then greased them with a smear of cold tallow till they shone dull. Red goes ahead, Amos said. Reads the ice. Red tugged his cap down and nodded. I'll sing if it's bad. You won't like the tune. They set out past the 2 cottonwoods that gave the place its name. The trees rattled their limbs and knocked off a little rhyme, blessing or warning. It was hard to tell. The wind had a long jaw, chewing the world down to 3 colors, white, black, and the rust of men. The first mile was honest, packed snow over dirt hard enough to hold. The second took them along the creek where the willows stitched on the banks together. Red tested each crossing with his pole, tapping, listening for that hollow drum that meant thin. Twice he waved them wide. Once he motioned them back and pointed up a cedar draw where the snow had laid soft and drifted high. The mare pulled steady. Tully slid when the sled canted. He grunted and swallowed it, eyes closed like a man on a rough river. Lydia walked beside the runner with the lantern tucked into her ribs, both hands making a cave around the globe. Every gust wanted the flame. She shifted with them, turning shoulders, stiff bandages blacking with old grease. The light threw a small orange circle on her coat and another on the snow. Amos watched the circle when his own eyes went watery with the sting of cold. It kept a man aimed. Hold, Red called soft. He stood at the lip of the beaver cut, a drop the length of a wagon. Below, the creek ice lay, blue-black and glassy. Snow had slicked it, pretty as trouble. We can go around a mile, Toby said, pointing at the ridge. Or we can make it honest. Honest'll get a man dead quicker than a lie on a day like this, Red said. Amos set the brake with his boot, felt the runner tremble under him. He weighed the horse, the rope, the shoulder that had one good pull left in it. We take it straight, he said. Red, you walk the mirror. Lydia, keep that light where the mare can see her feet. Toby, keep a hand to the backboard. They eased the sled over the lip. The runners found the ice and hissed. The mare, her legs wide and slid a pace she hadn't chosen. Amos stepped down, one hand on the headstall, boots slipping until the heel found a seam. He breathed through his teeth. The sled kept coming. Tully's blanket made a sound like paper tearing. Halfway down, a gust rolled over the bend and hit them hard enough to lean a man. The lantern smacked Amos's knee, bounced off the runner, and went sideways into the sled board. Glass rang. Lydia caught it before it went under and hugged it to her. The flame shrank to a pin, guttered, and then steadied, ugly, but there. "Easy," Amos said to the mare and to himself. He felt the pull of the sled overtake him. He let it, walked faster, then slower, feeding slack and gather like he'd done with green colts his whole life. Toby dug his heels into the back rail and rode it like a plow, laughing once when the world tried to take his feet and didn't. They slid the last yards like a sled made too straight and a hair too quick. The runners kissed the far bank with a bang that shook the whole rig. The lantern clanged against the post and left a new dent to match the first. The flame leaned sideways and then stood up again, stubborn as a mule. "Price paid," Red said, breath fogging. "Keep moving." The grade out of the cut climbed a notch too steep. Amos's shoulder spoke all the way to his teeth. Lydia put her back to the side rail and pushed, boots scrabbling until they found gravel under the skin of snow. Toby shouldered the load like a man twice his size and made a noise he'd laugh at later. The sled came up an inch at a time until the ground quit being a hill. They stopped under a stand of fir that had kept a floor to itself. The wind dropped to a mutter. Amos checked the knots on Tully and the line on the trace. He looked at Lydia's hands. The wraps were gray where coal smoke and sheep grease and road dirt had taken them. The skin at the edges was angry and healing both. "You cold?" he asked. "Cold enough," she said. He wanted to hand the scarf back right then, but it was doing a job on his shoulder, and there was day left. "Town's close," he said, which might have been a fact or a kindness. "May'll have coffee." "Sheriff'll have opinions," Red put in. "He can keep 'em warm by the stove," Amos said. They moved again. The creek bent toward Sweetwater, and with it fence lines began, rails half buried, posts capped with little white hats. A dog barked thin and far. Smoke lifted from low roofs. The road into town was a two-rut ribbon. Ruts were slick with use. The mare found them and settled to a trot that sounded like nails on glass. "Folks will see us," Toby said. "Let 'em," Amos answered. Lydia lifted the lantern higher. Its dented side faced the wind now, a scar turned into a shield. The flame inside wasn't pretty. It was enough. They slid down the last small grade toward May O'Rourke's place where the red stovepipe always smoked and the door never closed long. The sled creaked. The wind worried at their coats. The bank with its clean windows sat up the street like a man who'd shaved for Sunday. Amos put his eyes on the saloon instead. "Law's thin," Lydia said, as if trying the words on her own tongue. "Then we thicken it," Amos said, and the mare picked up her feet for the last stretch. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. May O'Rourke's place took them in the way a stove takes a cold hand. The door banged, heat rolled, and the smell of coffee and fried salt pork pushed the wind back out where it belonged. Red shouldered the sled rope off. Toby dragged Tully through on his heels, and the room made a noise. Boots, chairs, breath, like a body remembering how to move. "Lay him by the post," May said, already clearing a space with her hip. She wore a wool dress the color of good dirt, hair pinned hard, sleeves rolled to the elbow. "And mind my floor, Whitlow. Blood's hell on pine." "Doc says he'll keep," Amos answered, and they settled Tully against the load-bearing beam, wrists crossed high with harness and good knots. Lydia stood a half-step off the stove. Steam climbed out of her bandages and fed into the damp in her hair. The dented lantern she'd carried all the way rode on the bar, wick low, flame steady now that the air quit its meanness. The red Sweetwater Bank oval on the scrip looked louder than it had on Amos's table. Doc laid out the papers like a man setting tools in a line. "In his stamped script," he said, "issued neat as you please." He tapped a corner. "See that little flourish? That's Bragg's hand or his stamp, which is near enough his hand when winter comes." Folks were already shouldering in from the street. Men with blowed red knuckles, women with shawls pulled high, a blacksmith whose beard carried frost down to his chest. The storekeeper, tight as a knot of twine, took off his hat and found he didn't know where to put it. "That man stacked weights on the scale," he said, not loud, just true. "Charged me for air between beans." A widow with a gray braid and a boy hanging to her skirt nodded at the script like it was the face of a snake she knew. "Bragg's men come at night," she said. "Said my note had changed itself dearer while I was sleeping. Drove me from my water, and I had to haul from a hole that made our teeth ache." The blacksmith held up a hand that looked like it had been built out of hammers. "Took my coal when I couldn't make the paper sing. Told me to shoe his string and be glad for the warmth of it." May planted both palms on the bar. "Law's thin in winter," she said, voice clean as a bell. "Then we thicken it." Mort Kincaid came in on that, snow still sitting on his hat like a joke the sky had told, at his expense. He stopped just inside and read the room the way men read weather. His eyes lit on Tully, on the script on Lydia's wrists. He looked at Amos last. "Mort," May said, not unkind. "You got a town in your house, and it's cold." Kincaid took his gloves off, finger by finger. His hands were big and ropey. A badge rode his coat like a thing that had chosen him once and might yet again. "Now," he said, and the word came out tired. "There's a way to do this, and it ain't by shouting in a saloon. We been quiet a long time, storekeeper said. "Quiet cost extra." Tully turned his head against the post and showed a little of that pale to the edges smile. "You folks cry over paper," he said. "Paper don't care." Lydia stepped so she faced the sheriff without getting taller to do it. "And they set me in a dead stall with rope froze to my skin," she said. "They told my father he could sign his name neat or he could watch the creek go mean. That's your law thin enough to see through." Kincaid shut his mouth on whatever had been next. He looked at the script again, then at the blue smear along Lydia's belt. "Ink," Doc had said. "Ledger ink. Bank stink." He took his badge off his coat and set it on the bar like a man putting down a cup he hadn't meant to drink from. The saloon went church quiet. "Mort," May warned, "softer now." He ran a thumb along the star and left a drag of wet where the snow thawed. "Bragg owns my note," he said. "He owns half of yours. He owns the roof over the jail and the nails in it. I've been letting that fact tell me what's right." He lifted his eyes to Amos. "You got him tied, and you got ink says whose hand hauled the rope tight." Doc slid one more paper into the light. Tully's leather poke dropped. "Pardon my manners. And here's the list he carried. Names, amounts, dates, a side ledger. That's a book a court might like if a court could get here without losing its shoes." From the back, the liveryman cleared his throat. "Got room in my barn for men who need layin' flat till the judge don't freeze on the road," he said. "Doors lock, windows don't." "And I got coffee," May added, "for anyone standin'. And for the sheriff, if he aims to be the sheriff." Kincaid looked at his badge on the plank. He looked at the bank through the front glass, clean windows dressed up for Sunday. He looked at the boy holding the widow's skirt, and at the scarred bandage on Lydia's hand, and at Amos's shoulder roped up in an old scarf. "I owe this town more than I owe Bragg," he said. The words cost him, but they bought something. He picked up the badge and pinned it back on. "Tully Voss, I'm holding you on suspicion of kidnapping, assault, and general foolishness done for hire. You'll say what you know. We'll write it down so it don't blow away when the wind changes." Tully made a sound that might have been a laugh, if a man could laugh with his jaw clenched. You and what jail? He asked. The kind made out of people, May said. She had a length of quilt in her hands and was tying it around the crack of the door to keep the warm in. Best kind there is. Kincaid nodded, as if that settled the size of it. He turned to the room. We walk up that hill before snow stacks it higher. We go easy, lanterns in a string. No shootin' unless a man tries to make a fire where folks live. Bring the papers, bring your good sense, leave your whiskey. Leave my whiskey, May said, over my dead. Oh, fine, I'll cork it. Toby shrugged his cap down and grinned. I'll fetch extra wick, he said. Lanterns like to die when they see Bragg's house. Not today, Lydia said. She lifted the dented lantern from the bar and checked the wick with her thumb. The glass wore its new star, ugly and proud. The flame inside drew itself up like it had somewhere to be. She looked at Amos and then at the door. Let's thicken it, she said. Amos took the script and folded it once. Neat. He slid it into his coat where the pocket had been stitched back by a clumsy hand a long time ago. He felt the shape of it there. Paper had made trouble. Maybe paper would tell the truth when men stood around it close. He tightened the scarf knot at his shoulder and opened the door. Cold came hunting. So did Sweetwater. Lanterns came down off hooks and off rafters, out of coat closets and from the backs of cupboards. Some clean, some smoked, some new, bought with money nobody had. They all burned the same. Folks formed into a slow, bright rope, and Tully Voss went at the head of it with his wrists crossed and his mouth quiet at last. Kincaid stepped out with them, badge plain, hat low. The bank sat up the street and watched. Law's thin, May said once more, and handed a lamp to the blacksmith. Let's put some meat on it. They went up the hill in a slow, bright rope. Lanterns bobbing, glass storm-dimmed, wicks turned steady. Snow fell in a sift so fine it looked like ash shaken from a long fire. Boots clicked crust, then sank. Harness jingled where men had tied empty reins around their belts to keep their hands free. Tully Voss walked at the front on a short lead with Sheriff Kincaid's hand at his elbow, wrists bound high and sensible. He didn't talk. The bank sat at their backs, windows clean and blind. Bragg's house shouldered the hill ahead, wood painted the color of money that never saw dirt. May's stove heat stayed behind them. The cold took their coats by the lapels and read their bones. Red Holloway scouted a step off the line, lantern low to watch for ice. Keep to the drift, he said. Ice likes pride. Bragg's hireling showed at the porch rail, coats stiff, hats pulled, guns held like they'd been told to, not because they trusted them. Cold makes a finger think slow. You could feel it in the way the muzzles wavered, Ben. Kincaid raised his palm without breaking his breath. We're comin' to talk, he said. Nobody itchin' to cut new holes in himself today. The door opened into a square of lamplight the color of old butter. Silas Bragg stood there in a coat with velvet collar and a face gone smooth where most men carry weather. He had warm behind him and didn't share any. Sheriff, he said, easy as church. Sweetwater must be bored. Sweetwater's cold, May said from 3 ranks back, and the lanterns made her eyes catch fire for a blink. We came to thicken the law. Bragg's gaze found Tully, found Lydia's wrapped wrists, found Amos's scarf-bridled shoulder. He skimmed them like a man reading his own ledger. Assets, liabilities, spoilage. You folks owe me notes and sleep, he said. You owe me winter interest. That's the nature of paper. Amos stepped 1 pace and let his breath fog out first. We owe each other, he said. That's the nature of a town. Bragg smiled small. You got a jail up here in your pockets, Whitlow? We brought one, Kincaid said. He set his lantern on the rail and took a folded sheet from inside his coat. His thumb left a wet mark on the corner. I'm holding your man Tully on charges, named and to be named. I'm holding you for questioning on account of stamped scrip and a side ledger dropped when your dog slipped his collar. Doc stepped forward careful and held a lamp so the paper showed its face. He lifted a scrip by its edge like a man pinching a splinter. Sweetwater Bank, he read. Stamped neat, amounts notched wrong, dates that changed while folks slept. Toby, hat white with sifted snow, came up with a second book, thinner and meaner looking, leather puckered from wet. Found this chained in Tully's second poke, he said. Names and numbers that don't match the ones folks signed. Looks like two sets of truths met and one lied. Lydia didn't step forward, but her voice carried. They tied me to a dead stall and told my father his pen would learn a new song, she said. There's your witness who didn't choose to be. Bragg's jaw stayed loose. Only his eyes tightened, like glass cooling too quick. You got weather on your side and a crowd. Makes men feel right for a minute. He shifted his weight, and the hireling's guns twitched with him. Winter passes. Some winters kill, Red said. He took a step he shouldn't. His boot hit a skinned-over patch. His lantern swung high. His foot went out, and he dropped wrong. The crack of bone on ice was small and sharp. He made a sound through his teeth and held it there. Hands were under him before the lantern could spill. Toby caught the handle and kept the flame upright. Amos bent with a curse he didn't waste and set Red's ankle between both palms. The joint sat wrong. Twisted bad, Doc said. Already down, already unrolling cloth. Hold still, you old fool, before you teach yourself a new limp. The line of lanterns adjusted itself without orders. Two shifted forward, two back, making a brighter place for the work like halo cut from coal oil. Kincaid never took his eyes off Bragg. This is me readin' you a hold, he said, voice level and low. You can come sensible, or we can come through your door like a thaw and melt things you'll miss. Bragg looked at the lamps and at the faces behind them, men with frost singed in their beards, women with shawls and set mouths, a boy with both hands on a foot, lantern like it might have run if he loosened them. He took one step back onto a rug that had never seen a boot heel. You don't have a judge, he said. We got a sheriff, May answered, and we got each other. She nodded at Kincaid. Read it clean. Kincaid did, the words plain as nails, pounded into cold wood. Suspicion of fraud, coercion, kidnapping, misuse of bank instruments. He named them like he was laying tools back in a box where they fit. When he finished, the hill held the echo like a bowl holds the last of the beans. A hireling's gun dipped. Another licked his lip, and then remembered there was nothing there to wet. Bragg took a breath that didn't warm him. You'll regret this, he said, but it sounded like he'd practiced it in a mirror. Maybe, Amos said, but we'll regret it together. Tully finally found his tongue. Silas, he said, and there was nothing to call it but a plea. They got the books. They got the girl. His eyes flicked to the line of lanterns. They got a winter I can't push through. Bragg's face did a new thing, quick and ugly, and was gone. He turned to tell the hirelings to shut the door. They didn't move. Cold had frozen some of the order out of them, or the lamps had warmed a little of the fear. Guns down, Kincaid said, and he made it a place for a man to stand, not a command to be obeyed by a boy. One by one, the muzzles dropped like tired arms. Doc bound Red's ankle with cloth, and a splint cut from a shingle Toby stole off Bragg's own woodpile. Red breathed through it, open-eyed, not proud, just stubborn. Ain't broken, Doc said. Heard enough to teach you manners. Too old for them, Red managed. Kincaid stepped past the threshold like a man walking into his own barn. He touched Bragg's arm with 2 fingers. Not rough and not kind. You're comin', he said. Bragg looked at the hill, the dark town below, the lanterns in a string. He looked back at the warm behind him and the carpet and the brass rail by the stairs. He set his lips and came because there wasn't a choice that let him keep anything he thought he owned. They took his guns and the hirelings handed theirs over without making speeches. The crowd parted to let the little parade out. Bragg went between Amos and Kincaid like a calf herded quiet. Lydia stood aside and did not bow and did not spit. She held her lantern a touch higher instead, so the light laid across Bragg's face like a ledger line. "House'll be here when you come back to it," May said. "If it's yours by then." Snow kept falling the way it had started. Nothing dramatic, just steady enough to erase tracks behind a man if he didn't keep walking. Red tried to stand and put weight on the bad foot. It said no. Toby slung Red's arm over his shoulders and grinned, like the world had picked the right back to lean on. "Lanterns," Kincaid said, turning his collar up to the wind. "Keep 'em close. Paper likes to blow." They went down the hill the way they'd come up, light in a line, Tully and Bragg between them. The cold bit, but it bit all of them, and that made a kind of heat. The house stood on the ridge and watched them go, windows bright and useless. The bank watched too. Neither could see past the lamps. Love this tale? Hit like, share, and subscribe to keep the West wild. Snow quit trying to prove a point by afternoon and settled into a fine sift that made the world honest. Bragg sat in May's back room on a chair, with one leg shorter than the others, hands roped patient, steam from his breath fogging the window he wasn't allowed to look out of. Tully Voss lay in the livery under a horse blanket, with a halter chain for a bracelet, and Sheriff Kincaid's name hung on a nail above him, like a promise. Folks took turns at the door with lanterns, so the wind couldn't make off with the light. Amos stepped out to the stoop for the quiet that lives between noises. His shoulder had quit arguing and gone to a low knoll. The scarf bound it like a firm hand. He watched Sweetwater Street pack its own ruts, with men hauling kindling, women ladling stew into bowls that didn't match, boys running messages like pulleys in a mill. Town looked half-starved and stubborn, and more alive than morning had allowed. A sled came down the road with the patient sound good runners make when they feel they're going home. The team was two rough bays with snow caught in their fetlocks. A man stood braced on the runners, wrists in a fist wrapped with rawhide. The coat on his back was mended, the brim on his hat sweat dark where summer had gone. He slowed without meaning to, like a body pausing before the last step to a door it hopes is still there. "From Hart," May said from behind Amos, voice softened in a way she didn't lend often. She pushed the door wide so the warmth could walk out first. The sled slid to a standstill, crooked as a grin. Ephraim's boots hit the road, and he came in long strides that broke at the last two steps like he'd forgotten how to hurry. Lydia was already at the threshold. She didn't run. She didn't need to. He put both hands on her shoulders as if he were weighing a sack of grain to see if the winter had taken too much. Then he folded her into himself, and the sound he made wasn't speech. Her forehead found the hollow under his jaw and stayed there. All the steam they made together could have warmed a stovepipe. "You're here," he said finally, which was wrong and right in the same breath. "I'm here," she answered. He rocked once like a tree, finding its roots again. His eyes were winter-burned and wet anyway. Over her hair he saw Amos, and gave a nod that carried a season's work in it. "Whitlow," he said, "I'd heard talk you were made of fence posts and mule scents." "Most days," Amos said. Ephraim looked past Lydia's shoulder at the bandage. "They hurt you?" "They tried," Lydia said, and her mouth almost smiled without getting caught doing it. "Town helped," May snorted. "Town had a mind to." Kincaid stepped to the stoop with his hat in his hands, like a man at a visitation. "Hart," he said, "we got Bragg held, and his dog, too. We'll write what needs writin' and sit on it till a judge thaw. You'll get to tell your piece where paper can funct." "Here." Ephraim nodded. His eyes had already counted Bragg's absence from the hill. He breathed once, like drawing a line under a column of figures. Then he unwrapped the scarf that had lived around his own neck since before breakfast, and looked at the one on Amos's shoulder, the one that had warmed Lydia in a dead stall, and then gone to work holding bone and ache inside their lane. Lydia touched the wool at Amos's collar with her bandaged fingers. "This is yours," she said. She took the ends and folded them careful, the way women fold church linens, even though this one had a nibble missing and a grease shadow that no amount of lye would chase. She set it in his palm like a thing with weight. "Keep it, North Wind's got a long jaw still." "It's doing a job where it sits," Amos said, meaning his shoulder. "And it'll do the next one when you let it." She tightened the knot with a practiced tug so the sling rode right, then smoothed the tail once for no reason except the small sense of it. Her hand lingered a moment longer than mending requires. Ephraim watched the motion and the quiet around it. He scratched at the bristle under his chin and found a word that didn't spook. "Much obliged," he told Amos, plain. "There's water in our creek because men like you stand up when wind leans." He offered his hand. It was a hand that had pulled calves and fixed gates and learned how to be gentle without losing any of its size. Amos took it. His grip was the same kind of truth. "May," Ephraim said, turning, "you keep coffee enough for a valley?" "For a county," she said, and shoved mugs into palms until complaint them couldn't find room to roost. Toby slid past with a bundle of extra wicks under his arm like contraband. He looked at Lydia and then at the sled, trying to decide which needed his brag more. Red Holloway stuck his busted ankle out from a chair and waved a shingle at him. "Hey, quit strutting and fetch another stick, Roadrunner," he said, and Toby grinned and obeyed. Bragg shifted on the far chair and made his rope creak. He had learned how small a warm room can feel when it doesn't want you. He kept his mouth behind his teeth. The day put its shoulder to evening. Folks began to peel off toward home in twos and threes, lanterns making little houses of light that walked the ruts. Ephraim tugged the sled's blanket up higher for his daughter. "We'll go when it eases," he said, looking at the sky like it might bargain. "Dark's got deep ditches." "We'll ride slow," Lydia said. Her eyes went to Amos as if the road ran through him. "You'll be by in a day or so, to check the gate." "To check the gate," he agreed. The words had fences built around them where other words could have wandered and made trouble. He liked them that way and hated them some, too. Kincaid set 2 men to walk the sled apiece and bring the lantern back after. May stuffed a heel of bread and a jar of pain, drippings under the seat like a woman who has been poor and refuses to let it happen to someone else when she can help it. When it was time, Lydia climbed to the sled without a fuss and tucked her skirts under. Ephraim took the reins and looked at Amos over the backs of the bays. There were 100 things a man could say, none of them right in the open, with wind listening. He settled for a hat tip that struck true. Amos answered the same and stepped back so the runners could find the road. The sled eased forward, bells on the hames barely touching sound. Lydia looked back once, not a wave, just a look that put him on a shelf where a man could find it again. The scarf lay right against his neck, warm where her hands had worked it. Lanterns went with them a ways, then turned for town one by one as the valley took back its dark. Amos stood on May's stoop till the sled was a small shape, and then a line, and then only a sound in the knowing part of his ear. He felt the words stack up under his tongue and didn't let them out. Not yet. The wind had quieted enough to hear other things: harness clink, hoof thud, a stove ticking to itself in a house he couldn't see. He breathed and let the silence hold what it could. "Gate'll need checking," May said from the doorway, not looking at him. "Soon as the light's worth it," he said. She nudged the door. Come on, Whitlow, you're getting snowed on, and I ain't sweeping it twice. Sweetwater put itself back together, the way a man buttoned a coat, with stiff fingers. Slow, but it held. Kincaid posted a list with a nail through it on May's door. 2 men to the livery, 2 to the back room, 1 to each corner where wind likes to stir trouble. The list flapped and read itself to anyone who needed to know. Doc made his rounds with a lantern and a jar of brown salve. Red Holloway cursed his splint and learned how to sit in a chair like it was a saddle. Toby burned new wick and left a coil of it at every stove that had light enough to share. By dark, the bank had shuttered its clean windows and gone to pretending it didn't live there. Bragg stared at his boots in May's back room and started to learn there were hours longer than others. Tully found out a horse blanket itches when a man can't turn. The town's hum came up under the wind, wood split, spoons clicked. Somebody laughed once and felt strange doing it. Amos stepped into it and then out of it, like a man trying the temperature of a creek. He thanked May, nodded at Kincaid, touched the brim to Doc, told Toby to sleep sometime before morning. He walked the 2 ruts out of town with the lantern that had learned stubbornness twice today hanging from his hand. Snow hissed a little under the crust as he went. The scarf kept his shoulder where it belonged. The mare blew fog when he reached the lean-to. He stripped tack by lantern and rubbed her neck, the flat of his hand finding the grain of her. She pushed her face against his chest and stood there as if listening to his ribs. "That'll do," he said, and both of them knew which of them he meant. Inside, the cabin remembered him. He banked the coals, shook the ash, laid 2 splits just so, and waited until the fire caught without fuss. He set the coffee back to a small boil and hung the dented lantern on its nail by the door. It hung true now, not cocked, as if the nail itself had decided to try harder. The flame wasn't pretty, it didn't need to be. It threw a coin of light on the floorboard where Lydia's boots had shed snow, and on the table where paper had lied, and then told the truth when men stood around it close. He washed the grease off the threshold where the sack had smothered fire, found the stain stubborn, left it. Some marks meant to last through a wash or 2. He tugged at the scarf knot, loosened it a finger's width, then tightened it back. The cloth smelled of wool and a line of sheep that had crowded a gate some other winter. It had taken her heat once. It took his now. He did not call that anything. He let it be a scarf. Out the window, the night took a long breath and held it. Down valley, past the black ribs of the cottonwoods, a thin thread of smoke rose where the Hart place sat tucked out of the worst of the wind. You could barely see it unless you knew where to look. Amos did. He stood there until the sting left his eyes and something easier took its place. Tomorrow would want hands. Fences to set up right after men had leaned on them wrong. A gate to check. Iron teeth, wooden cheeks, ice pried out of the hinge so water wouldn't jam when thaw came. He pictured the headgate lever, stiff, then willing. The first dark trickle cutting a line under the skim, the sound it made, small as a whisper and true. He blew on his coffee and sipped and let the heat go down to the place the day had worn thin. The house ticked, stove, rafters, rope drying on a peg. He heard his name the way a man hears it when nobody says it. In the little hush between the wind and the next thing, words rose up, big and wrong for a room this size. He let them slide back where they came from. Wind knows the taste of speech. It'll take it, gnaw it clean, leave you with the shape and none of the meat. He lifted the lantern, checked the wick, trimmed it square. The flame steadied and leaned toward the door as if it wanted the road again. Not yet, he told it, same as he might tell a colt. At first light. He stepped out and swept the stoop with the side of his boot, a little clean square to start the morning with. Cold nipped his knuckles, then quit. Somewhere in the white, a coyote talked to himself and got no answer. Amos listened until the night had said everything it planned to say. He went back in and set the bar. The lantern made its coin of light on the plank. He sat where Lydia had sat and put his hand on the table, palm down, as if he were telling the wood he meant to keep it. The room breathed with him. In hard weather, a man learns to pass heat from hand to hand. Justice goes that way too. Courage don't have to shout. It can sit a while, keep, and wait on morning. Snow's easing off, but the story's heat stays, passed hand to hand like a lantern on a long night. If you were Amos, would you speak or hold your tongue? Comment 0 to speak, 1 to stay quiet. If this ride sat right with you, tap subscribe and ride along for the next trail tale.